Should be able to hear me now. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Good morning, everybody. My name's Chris Smith. I'm the CEO at Foundation Housing, and I'm also on the board of Australian Community Housing. And I'm delighted to be your facilitator for this major concurrent session today, the Burning Platform, Housing, Climate and Disaster Resilience. And I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panel. Prior to doing that, though, I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today, the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I was at an event last night and we had a really moving welcome to country where it was acknowledging 60,000 years of Aboriginal people bringing their families up on the land we're meeting on today, and how housing was such an important part of their life, and how today we're still talking about housing, and more so the essential need, and how critical it is for all people to have access to safe and secure and affordable housing. And the timing of this conference and what it means is not well overdue, but certainly a subject that we're all very passionate about and want to see resolved. And also, I think, if I can say that, I think we need to set a few targets as a sector and not talk about policy and all those things. They're all important things, but let's set targets so we don't talk about supply, but let's talk about a number that we aim for, so that in 10 years' time we can sit here and say we hit the number, as opposed to we tried. Let's hit the number and let's get going. But with that, I'd like to introduce our panel. So I've got Jenniy Gregory, Program Leader, Race for 2030 Homes, James Henry, Housing Choices Australia, Alexandra Meek from the Department of Housing and Works, and I've got Professor David Sanderson from the University of New South Wales today. I'm going to invite the panel to say a few opening remarks, and then from there we have a brief presentation from Jenniy and David, and then we'll move to the floor for Q&A. In relation to your Q&A, if you could keep the questions quite succinct, so minimise your statements but ask the questions so the panellists can spend time responding to those questions. But with that, I'd just like to pass across to Alex to say a few words.
Yep, happy to kick things off. So I'm Alex Meek from the Department of Housing and Works. I lead the Climate and Sustainability team on the housing side of the department. So although I have a background in sustainable building and in government, I'm pretty new to Housing and Works. I've just been with the department for the last couple of months, so I'm still very much in the learning and planning space. So today we're talking about housing, climate and disaster resilience. I'm sure we all know about this thing called climate change, and that we're expecting increasing severe weather events into the future. So responding to these is a cross-agency collaboration. So for anyone familiar with disaster resilience, they're probably aware of the catchily named PPRR framework. That's prevention, preparedness, response and recovery. So for social housing, the Department of Communities Emergency Services team is very involved in those middle two, preparedness and response. So making sure that there are plans in place for potential emergencies and responding to those emergencies as they happen. Ensuring tenants have somewhere they can stay and so on. And the Department of Fire and Emergency Services is typically the lead for recovery. But then for social housing, the area where the Department of Housing and Works can really have an impact is with that first P, prevention. We can't reduce the likelihood of the climate events themselves happening, unfortunately, but we can reduce the severity of the impact or the consequences when the hazard does occur. So in my current learning space, I'm in the process of developing an understanding of what makes up those 45,000 housing properties that we have, in order to plan an optimum program of works to improve the climate resilience of those. So we need a baseline before we can work out what it is we actually need to do. While it would be great to immediately upgrade all of our properties, unfortunately, given how many we have around the state and money and trades not being limitless, we do have to make decisions to target our spending to be fair to our tenants and to get the most value out of our dollars spent. But thinking about our existing portfolio, We're looking at what changes we can make, what we can retrofit to our existing houses, considering heat waves, flooding, bushfires, storms. What sort of changes can we make to improve people's response in those weather events? And we'll be considering the benefits, the costs, the WA market and maintenance, basically with value as the bottom line. And then in terms of our new builds, can any of those things that we're retrofitting become part of our new builds from the outset? Are there structural or design changes that can be made to improve the climate resilience of those properties? That said, a lot of, when it comes to structural and design changes, a lot of things in those spaces are picked up by Australian standards. So a few years ago, the roof tie-down requirements were significantly changed in the northern areas of the state in response to the changing weather events to increase wind speeds. But then last year in WA, we had 2 tornadoes in Bunbury. So for anyone not from WA, Bunbury is a few hours south of Perth. So that's an area where we're typically not seeing those kind of weather events. So that wasn't picked up by the standards. But as we know, with the climate, things are changing. So we do already have some ad hoc programs underway within the department. We have SHEPI, the Social Housing Energy Performance Initiative, which is installing insulation in about 4,300 social housing properties in remote and regional areas. We have the Remote Communities Fund, which is building new and upgrading Aboriginal community housing with insulation and other upgrades. And then we are trying to learn as we go as well. So following, say, the Kimberley floods in 2023, we had a lot of tenants displaced for quite a few months after those floods. So our construction teams now are looking at what changes they can bring in, things like raising floor levels to reflect the rising flood levels. And can they change some material specifications to things that can more readily get wet and not be so bad when they dry out. So we're not doing nothing while we work out what's best. Don't let perfect get in the way of good, as they say. So while we run these ad hoc programs, in the background we are trying to develop what's next, what's the big ticket climate resilience piece of work for the department. So I'm not saying we have all the answers yet. We don't, but it is an area that's important to us, something that we're working on because we want our housing to be fit for purpose for our tenants, even as the climate changes. We want our tenants to be comfortable and safe.
Great, thanks Alex for that wonderful introduction. James?
It sounds like we're grappling with many of the same issues that Alex is and the department, but probably on a smaller scale. I'm James Henry from Housing Choices and have the joy of operating across 5 states, 13,000 tenancies in a range of densities, geographies, climates, which are changing, as we've said. I thought I'd talk about intrinsically in our core, community housing providers know how to deal with this type of challenge. We know that you don't just build a house and it's there and you can forget about it. We're good actors. We care about the tenants. We care about the longevity of the asset. And I think that's really important to emphasise in this sort of forum because it is not just an educative piece, but it's a day-to-day optimising of outcomes. We know that we're dealing with people who are often on low incomes, so we're trying to maximise their comfort. They often spend longer periods of time at home. And so we're tapping into the same sort of programs as Alex mentioned, the SHEPI project, particularly in Western Australia. In Victoria, the Neighbourhood Batteries program, and through our portfolio, trying to get bulk savings for residents so that they can more easily adapt to climate change. This also includes in new build solar and green energy provision. I think the fundamental step change that we need to make as an organisation is looking at data and operating frameworks. As an organisation, we talk about moving from being opportunistic to strategic, and you need to make decision making right. You need frameworks and data to drive that, and it's entirely appropriate to be talking about it in this sort of context because I think it is preventative rather than, mopping up the floods when they come. And we have a portfolio, some of which even in Dockland CBD Melbourne, which is subject to flooding, So from a framework perspective, we have design guidelines, which we renew every year and have a feedback loop from our portfolio to make sure that new builds are right, and a lot of that is picked up in funding requirements and design guidelines and other funding requirements. We have a commercial investment framework to ensure that there's a robust operating model around all of our projects, and a project management resource to sort of make sure that all the steps are appropriately contemplating inputs from across the business. But data is where we've made a real change, and we had a delegation from Denmark the other day who came to our office and showed the incredible granularity that they have in Denmark. I don't know how it works with privacy, but they know the socio and economic groupings of particular, down to the household. They know climate change, they're subject to flooding risk, the economic patterns, family makeup, health. They probably know what people had for breakfast. I don't know how they do it, but the maps look very, very great, and it's sort of that level of data is what we need to drive change. And we've made a change. We're using Aon's combined hazard information platform, CHIP. I'm not sure if others use that, among other sort of data platforms, and it's an aggregation of site-specific information that looks at flood risk, bushfire risk, even crime. These insurers, they do actuarial analysis going out into the future. And we've linked that, my colleagues, some of who are here, have linked that through to a dashboard, which enables us to make strategic decisions around responses to our existing portfolio, but also to assess new opportunities that we might seek to pursue or not pursue, depending on that on the feedback that comes up, together with other inputs like walkability scores, CIFA, and other risks and asset renewal condition reporting. So not only does that help our operational teams in tailoring responses to tenants and knowing who's best to sit in particular housing, but it also, the long-term asset decision making is informed. So when would we divest of a project? And then lastly, construction. I think it's another opportunity where if you look at that nexus between what's causing climate change, construction is about a quarter of Australia's impact on emissions, and I think it's good to think of the two together. And so we're really thoughtful around the processes that we pursue when we're doing projects, and our design guidelines have questions around orientation, but also detailed specification to make sure that they're going to endure. And I think just in the debate and through the conference, you'll hear around, the pattern book in New South Wales, which is really great, in planning reform generally, and modern methods of construction. All of these sort of incremental changes can, I think, help set us up better for managing climate change over the long term. We have a project in Queen's Walk, I can see Kim Bomford, which is a retrofit, which is another thing that we need to contemplate. It was 4 existing towers, and we've built 2 new towers. And so a CHP's role in being able to manage existing residents while other construction's going on site, densifying a site, retaining a sense of community on the site. It's a blend of social and affordable housing, and in uplifting the quality of all of the housing on the site near a city, with access to jobs and transport. CHPs are good actors in this space because part of climate resilience is around being integrated into cities better and having access to supports that everyone deserves.
Great, thanks, James. And as someone who's worked closely with Housing Choice from time to time, I concur that James and his team have done a great job, and Housing Choices are one of the sector leaders when it comes to resilience and climate and your design guidelines. So well done, James, on that. Jenny, if you could come to this lectern, please.
Oh, yes. I'm lucky I've got a touch screen. I keep forgetting. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm Jenniy Gregory. I'm the program leader race for 2030. I'm responsible for homes. And if somebody, I always say, if somebody sleeps there, it comes into my remit, except if it's a hospital, because that's far too complicated. So I look at rentals, Indigenous housing, high-rise apartments, the whole remit, new National Construction Code, existing. My KPI is to have facilitated the upgrade of over 1 million homes by 2030. Now that's a pretty big challenge, but through the projects I'll just go through in a minute, then you'll be able to see how the breadth of what we're trying to do. And I'd like to acknowledge my colleague Gemma Cook down the back, who leads the Race for Change portfolio, particularly to do with training and skills. So as you can see, we've got 5. We're not siloed, so we have a number that are apartments and EVs, for instance. We bring together the whole of the energy value chain. We've probably got now, I reckon, about 200 partners. I brought on about 70 last year in my new projects for project-only partners. So we've got 9 research organisations which are listed there, and what we do is we co-fund research that leads to lower energy bills and lower emissions through innovation at scale across the economy. And for me, as you'll see in a couple of slides, that includes resilience and future-proofing homes. It's not just about a like for like. So this is my diagram of homes. So I have everything from product development, as in a new 3-in-1 heat pump that is heating water and doing air heating and cooling in a house, right through to demand response using the electric hot water systems to soak up the solar sponge in the middle of the day. And then in between are all those other projects that contribute to lowering bills and emissions, and they're probably the main part. And as you can see, the co-benefits, as we've already spoken about in the first session, is about, it's not just developing new products, it's improved health, it's comfort, it's economic wealth creation, it's new skills and jobs, it's adding back to the economy by improving housing. So the big project is energy upgrades for Australian homes. This started about 2 years ago, and the annual impact report is being released at All Energy later in October. And this is the largest race project. It's over 7 million when you include in kind. And what it's trying to do, what it is doing, is talking to people in the community. What are your problems when trying to upgrade your home? What can we do to help you to upgrade your home to be more comfortable, to be lower in energy and emissions? And we've developed, the team has developed a whole range of different scenarios, one of which you can see there. But I recommend that you look at the annual impact report. That's the website for us. That'll be released, and it'll be released shortly. I was hoping to have so you could click on it, but technology didn't work that well. The APY Lands Energy Efficiency Retrofit Pilot. This is being led by the Department of Energy and Mining in South Australia and University of South Australia, and also with South Australia Housing Trust. This is a really interesting project because there were houses in one of the communities on the APY which had 8.5-star designed homes. However, they were terrible to live in. They were okay in summer because people were used to the heat and there was evaporative cooling and there's other measures. But in winter, when it got below 0, the only heating really was the oven. And they used to open the ovens to heat because the heating was a wood-fired stove heater, and of course in the desert you don't have wood. So that's, when I go to my next slide, is it's so important to, as we've already heard, listen to people, design for community. And also I believe there's been quite a bit being discussed in West Australia about thermal bridging. As you can see there from one of the slides, that was one of the things that we found early in there. It's not a criticism whatsoever, it's a finding that because the houses weren't built to perhaps the standard you would expect. If you followed the NCC, you shouldn't have thermal bridging, but these ones were compounded by drafts coming in, by cold, so we've got lots of learnings to be able to share, and WA government is part of our industry reference group, and I think, Alex, it's helping to inform some of your projects going forward. Glebe Energy Transition, this was a place-based upgrade model for social housing, which looked at 3 scenarios to see what would be most cost-effective to do and which have the shorter payback. And it looked at solar on the roofs, also then at the thermal impacts of poor thermal performance and what could be actually done. And our thanks to Bridge Housing and the New South Wales Government for supporting that project. And finally, we've got one that is close to my heart, which is driving energy upgrades in private rental homes. Because probably like not a lot of other areas, there's no money as such for upgrading private rentals. However, there is a couple of big sticks coming. One of them is NATERS, the National Australia House Energy Rating Scheme, has been developed for existing homes. The second one in Victoria is minimum energy performance standards for rentals and at point of sale. So what we saw was that there is going to be a big stick. We wanted to get in front of that big stick and inform landlords and inform real estate agents how they can be part of the solution, particularly for real estate agents, and how it doesn't have to cost a lot to upgrade your home, your rental properties, your investment properties. You increase their value, you increase their longevity, you have happy customers, clients who will stay there longer. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. I concur with your sentiment there about, I think Shane raised it in his initial opening remarks about consultation with people to make sure we get those homes right, and that would have avoided the wood-fired heaters in APY lands. But I'd like to invite David up to the stage. Thank you.
They said if you just click your face, your image will come up. I just have one image that's come up, and I'm going to sit back down. And that's on. You can hear me. Yes, it's absolutely true. My notes felt a bit shabby as I was writing them this morning, so I requested that we could have a very professional cover-up. And so 20 minutes ago, the organisers kindly agreed. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about this report, which was a collaboration, which Ahuri very kindly identified as a critical issue, and I'm seeing Rachel over there, so thank you, Rachel, and your team for identifying this as an issue. We were fortunate enough to work on this project for 2 years, and when I say we, I'm talking about a cast of thousands, you might imagine, but colleagues from Curtin University, Francesca Perugia in particular. Oh, who's here? Great. Well, I'm going to mention your name every time I mention the word data, because Francesca was the author of that. And also from RMIT, Jago Dodson and Annette Crone, who looked at policy. And then ourselves at UNSW, where we looked at actors and the gulf between immediate post-disaster needs and longer-term recovery. And you mentioned PPRR already, so thank you for that. I'll scrub that from what I'm going to say. But my intention obviously is not to bore you to death. If I do my job half well enough, you'll download the report. It's outstanding because of the people who we were privileged to talk with. Over 73 people we interviewed, 8 case studies across the country, including 2 here, which Francesca led on also, and an awful lot of work in lit reviews. There are 4 big fat reports. This is the summary report, and the key word that Ahuri rightly identified was coordination, how we get better at that. And we all know coordination is easy to say, terribly hard to do. Even getting to integration is a holy grail, many would say, which we're nowhere near at, although we are getting better at it. So, very briefly, I'd just like to make 3 comments and then just a little bit of the highlights from the report in the hope that you'll take a look at it. The first one is to say that I'm sure we all know in this room, disasters aren't natural. There's no such thing as a natural disaster. Discuss. I know some people have strong views on that. I don't say it as a pedant. My 8-year-old saying I'm the arch pedant. She's right, of course. But it's not pedantry. It's around opportunity and reframing that actually disasters are our choice. And there's a famous book called Disasters by Choice. We choose those things, not because we're evil, but because we don't do things, omission, other things. We're also really, really good at preventing disasters, preparing for them. Look at the fire escape thing, the strong columns, all that stuff. We're really good at stopping bad things happening, but obviously not good enough because we're in a context of increasing change, which I'll come on to in a minute. So when I say disasters aren't natural, there's a global UN campaign on that. That means we have power over rather than being, sort of slaves to it. And I'm grateful to you for mentioning you use the word hazards, and actually what we do about it is the point. So as we all know. A second one, which someone put to us as part of our research in the Ahuri office, in fact, a very senior insurance person, was to identify housing and disasters as a wicked problem. And I think he's right. And there's quite a definition of the phrase wicked problem, 6 or 7 criteria. I forget them all now. But yeah, housing after disaster fits the idea of a wicked problem. It's not like housing was easy before disasters struck. And in Lismore, in the Northern Rivers, one person said to us, the floods struck a housing disaster, which is a very powerful phrase. The floods struck a housing disaster. We were already in a housing crisis of unaffordability, of shifts towards models of tenancy, which obviously this conference is talking a lot about, and rental markets and all the stuff there, and a few having the most and all those kinds of things. So we're not stuck, but we're in changes right now where these things happen. And then along come disasters. They're wicked problems. Yeah, and I just want to pick up a couple of quotes from my colleagues. And the same guy actually said, he rather summed it all up. After he said it's a wicked problem, he just sat and said, I still don't understand why we continue to build on flood zones. And you sort of think about that and you think, oh my God. It's not like we don't know. Where I live in the Southern Highlands, New South Wales, love it. Lots of building on flood zones. And that, as we all know, again, not because we're evil, because it's competing priorities. Because we have a housing disaster, we have these other things. And that brings me to my third quick sort of overview, is that we are shifting from what I heard someone said recently, from disaster events to disaster epochs. That actually we're getting more frequent disasters. Everybody in this room knows that from all the stuff that's taken place. Cyclone Seroja in Western Australia. They said Western Africa there. That's a previous life. Elsewhere, New South Wales, across the board, we all know we're getting more frequent disasters, not least because of climate change, but also more people in more dangerous places as populations grow. That's another bit of the story, the choices we make. So events to epochs means those low-frequency, high-impact events are continuing. Other people in this country in particular call them cascading events, where we get one after the other. What relief? What recovery when you're then hit with another one? I'm not a doomsayer, I'm just saying there's going to be more of it, because that's where all the evidence points at. So actually, literally just 2 or 3 quotes from each of the 3 areas. There are sub-reports. As I say, our good friends at RMIT, Annette and Jago, did this amazing study when they looked at planning, and they're proud planners, and they themselves would say they were new to the disaster space. And again, this wicked problem, this complication. And in their report, and also in our final report, you'll see a list of housing policies, urban planning policies, disaster policies, the 3 tiers of government, of course, that we have in this country. And there are complexities, and I mean, who knew? Who knew? Government's complex. One of the, sort of to make a pithy observation, it's a table, and it should, of course, be the Venn diagram, and we need to shift to the Venn diagram of the overlaps and the integrations. And there are good examples in that, and Jago and Annette conclude by saying there is good progress. It's not like it's a surprise to anybody. It's the machinery of government is very slow and very complex. They cite 2 examples, sorry, it's a bit New South Wales, from the recent Reconstruction Authority of the disaster adaptation plans, the DAPs, that are currently underway, which is right at the beginning of the story. They've just announced quite recently about land use planning and disasters, better risk assessments, being quite serious about that. Very hard to coordinate and all those things, but well-intended. Another is the state disaster mitigation planning, which is taking place there. And to quote Jago and Annette, it's people thinking about how to get this right. I'm not saying it's the first time ever, of course it's not, but actually, sort of genuine attempts to actually move ahead when it comes to that. So some good news in a complex space. So that idea of better integration. A second bit, which, I mean, you were in the room, Francesca, please all gather around Francesca afterwards. But the key quote when you talked about data was to put the trust back into data. And just some of the quotes talking about data sharing limitations. You know, for not wrongly, we're limited to the data we can share, but that's frustrating in a reconstruction center or something. You can't tell that aid agency what that person needs because of data. Well intended, but it's slow and it's cumbersome. Strengthening data governance and getting better at risk assessments. I'll say no more knowing the author of that's in the room. And then very finally, the third bit that UNSW led, relating to actors, the immediate needs, the wicked problem of you need to be dry and warm and safe, and then the recovery. And we all know pods are well intended and all those things, but they're expensive, they're slow. What do you do afterwards? So one of our recommendations is, if used, they're a last resort. In the international sphere, they say there's no such thing as temporary housing because it's expensive and it's hard. But have a plan for use afterwards. Investing locally is the obvious one. The plenary this morning talked about localization, local ownership, and that was very much the theme of our report, which was around localization. Whose disaster is it? Supporting locally. And our sort of pithy soundbite we came out with was a fourth R for resilience, to go for LGAs. Along with rates, roads and rubbish, and of course governments do way more than that. I was picked up on that, and rightly so. But to give that soundbite, love or hate the word resilience, it's about getting better at disasters, leave it at that. So actually being better at that, and if it's not locally led, what's the point? And I think I'm pretty safe in saying all the evidence point to local ownership is the best form of recovery, knowing how pithy and complex communities are, not suggesting it's nirvanic in any way, because it's not, but it's a whole lot better than the top-down imposition of being told what to do. Okay, so that's a long game. We know that's hard, but unless and until we think the long game, this is governance, the governance conversation, decentralization, then we're stuck with a top-down approach that is wasteful and not very good. Good people, bad systems, and that should shift.
Very good, thanks, David. We've just got a few questions first. I'll put to the panel, and after that we'll move to the floor. So, James, how are Housing Choices integrating climate resilience into your new developments?
Yeah, well, I'd firstly say that we've had some floods in the northwest of Tassie, but otherwise we haven't been in a situation where Northern Rivers, Malakuta, South Coast, New South Wales, these sort of cataclysmic events, and we don't want to be. So it really is a preventative sort of situation. So I think we're thinking really strategically around where we locate our dwellings. That's a key point. We don't want to be putting them in floodplains or subject to other risks. And that tool that we've got, the CHIP tool, which looks at cyclone, earthquakes, flooding, bushfire risk, is one of the first sort of passes that we do through any investment decision. And then I think we're just following best practice infill development in urban centres and towns. Like I think we're doing projects in regional Victoria at the moment which are probably denser than would typically be the case, and we could talk about density done well. And if that's located near the centre of town, we've got a project in Warrigal at the moment which was controversial. Planning reforms helped us get that through. I think it will be a really great outcome that provides safe, warm, energy efficient housing for people near jobs and services. So that's pretty much how we're doing it. And I think it's the right time to be thinking boldly around how we get a legacy of quality, given, if HAF3, they want to acquit all of the 40,000 dwellings, and you heard Ben Rimmer talking about deliver. I can see Housing Australia people in the room under a lot of pressure, but it's really important that it's not a whole lot of greenfield 3-bedroom homes which don't respond to need. Western Sydney, that gets up to 50 degrees. We don't want to be having that sort of conversation to fix another housing crisis in 20 years.
Thanks, James. David, you spoke about the floods in Lismore, and I recall when they happened, I was talking to John McKenna at the time, as CEO of Pacific Link Housing, and the challenges he had in mobilising and transitioning his people who'd been impacted by losing their homes, and just the thought that of how long it will take to rectify and rebuild and what that meant. From your perspective, how do we make sure we do that right? because we don't want to have a situation where John McKenna's properties are rebuilt and in 5 years' time the data said the flood would come back and the flood comes back and we're back in where we are and we've got uninsurable properties and all of those risk mitigators. What are some of the findings in your report that you would recommend that government and providers follow?
Well, page 7 has the answer, so if you... No, I don't want to be pithy about a serious subject. Is there anyone here from the Northern Rivers? Because I want to be respectful of that, because I'm not from the Northern Rivers, although I've been there a lot and good friends who are based there. It's intractably complicated. It's frustrating. People shouldn't be living in that area that dips down. And that was known when people started to build. People of previous generations. That said, that's where people are. Amazing organisations such as the Northern Rivers, Living Labs Northern Rivers, which is around consulting and getting people together to work together to do things. They've got a shop on the main street where people can drop in. Other community groups are planning for when the flood comes. And I'm thinking businesses. I'll come, I hope, to what you're asking. But so that the water will flow all the way through. And that you put stuff on wheels and you have electricity high, which in itself is a really miserable, depressing thought, hey? Because actually you're living with this stuff. The frequency, the growth. That's because people can't afford to shift. People don't want to shift because of all the social ties. Getting insurance. It's a really awful, wicked problem. And I don't want to be sitting here saying it's awful. But I'm afraid it is awful. And it's terrible. Not because people are evil. For the rest, an awful lot of efforts. We're all knowing the Reconstruction Authority has bankrolled big organisation to do stuff around buybacks, around other things. But then you get stuck in some of the legislation which prevents people living in houses which they themselves think they're good enough, but because of insurance claim risk and suing risk, you're not allowed to live in. And we live in a country that rightly is strong on governance structures and risk and insurance, and also actually unwittingly conspires to hamper people getting on with their own lives. And that's a non-argument, you know, what you want people to be living in danger. Well, whole swathes of humanity for the whole history have done that, and right now across the world. And I'm not arguing that we live in danger, and at the same time what is acceptable risk is a challenge where we get shifted from one side to the other. When it comes to building houses, you'll know better than I just don't know, but it's complex and it's hard and it's fraught. There are good people seeking to do things, high levels of frustration, the hidden traumas, all these things, and heaven forbid there are more floods, but that's the predictions that are upon us, and people know those things. The concept of managed withdrawal, you know, that thing that's happened in other cultures throughout other centuries, if not millennia, I'm sure, and have gone on, and it's hard and it's complex. There's a socio-economic lens to that. We haven't talked Cabbage Tree Island, but if you're forced to say you can't live there, I doubt that would happen in the same areas in rich Sydney, because there's a socio-economic element where disasters are not equal. So there's a whole bundling of complexity. But we do have the wit and the wisdom, and they're not natural, but it takes big decisions, but no politician's going to win by saying you've all got to leave your house right now. And it's a long-term shift to make some of these things happen, and I'm frustrating myself by not saying, ha, but you know, beware people with answers. But there are principles and long-term thinking that can happen based on what I would suggest happens elsewhere.
Great, thanks, David. Jenny, what are the learnings from your GLEBE project that are applicable to other social housing providers?
Thank you. Yes, GLEBE was a really interesting project, and it was only stage 1 of a much bigger project. And it looked, as I said, at 3 different scenarios. One was putting solar on the rooftops and not doing any upgrades. The second one was doing the solar and a little bit of electrification. And the third one was electrification and insulation and other thermal outcomes. It came, not surprisingly, as the best outcome for the residents would be the third one, but the best outcome for return on investment was probably the second one, which stage 2 wants to actually work out and see if it was. What's the big learning, I think, from all of my projects is there's a lack of appropriate, sustainable, long-term, affordable capital. And that's the really big thing that's holding us back from so much of this. It needs to be appropriate for social housing and then different upgrades for social housing. It needs to be for landlords so they can access, so they will upgrade their properties. It needs to be for mum and dads who are in low income, who can't or don't want to have another loan. How can they then get the access? And once I think we solve that, or go down the route of looking at different financing mechanisms, looking at having a green bond, not necessarily a sovereign wealth fund, but a green bond that I believe from a minimal chat with Treasury, you can actually put through SHEPI or you can put through HERF. So you can actually create a green bond and the governance structure is already there. So for instance, for social housing, you've got to coin a phrase, a wicked problem as a sector, because you don't, as a sector, know quite what the cost of the upgrading is, because the data is mixed from where all your houses have come from. They're in different climatic zones, they're different typologies, they're different sizes, but they need to be upgraded. If there was a long-term fund of low interest that you could do to upgrade that, then your insurance hopefully would go down, because the insurance might know that you're doing that. The health and well-being of your tenants would improve. They'd be able to work more if they're able to. There's so many benefits out of being to leverage that. But as I don't see at the policy level, and we did launch a report today, you can see it on LinkedIn and University of New South Wales on policy, which has come out of the Energy Upgrades for Australia Homes project. That touches on it, and that's going to be this kind of funding is going to be the theme that they're going to research in the next part, because if we unless we unlock that, we're not going to get very far. If we can unlock that, we can upgrade the million existing homes, we can upgrade every type of home, we can build much better homes as well.
Great, thanks, Jenny. I can concur with, as Foundation Housing, we struggle with that, allocating capital to or funding towards how do we make our homes more sustainable when we've got more pressing needs, such as essential bathrooms or kitchens or structural work, and then that takes priority over the sustainability matters. So having a fund that is affordable and enables us to do that, and I'm sure Housing Choices and the department would say the same, it'd be a very good initiative. Conscious of time, we've got about 45 minutes before lunch. I might move to the floor. We've got two wonderful volunteers who have mics, so if you can put your hand up. As I said, keep your questions in sync for the panellists and nominate the panellists you'd like to put your question to. And we have our first question up the back with, thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Violet. I'm from NT Shelter. So last summer, Central Australia experienced over 100 consecutive days of heatwave conditions, the longest extreme heatwave recorded in the NT in modern history. With the NT homelessness rate sitting at 12 times the national average, the NT social housing waitlist sitting at 10 years in most regions, a hemorrhaging housing and homelessness workforce, and a state government with different priorities. My question to the panel is, what role do you think the federal government and broader sector could play in protecting homeless Territorians from imminent extreme climate events?
I might move to you first, Jenny, if that's okay.
Is that on? Yes. Great question. That's replicated. I think the Northern Territory is the worst because you have the most extremes, because you also have cold in the winter as well as that horrible heat and the humidity. I know there's been $4 billion put by the federal government to the Northern Territory, but there's no, as far as I have seen in my limited research, there is not a lot of governance about what it's going to do. For me, modern methods of construction that are designed by local people for local situations, that's the way to go. Wali Junta in the, I think it's Alice Springs, no, Tennant Creek, sorry. But they've been doing that. Up in the Pilbara, there's another project that we're right at the beginning of that's looking to use structurally integrated panels that are designed to local conditions to be able to then manufacture them in the factory, truck them up, but then local people will be trained as to how to put them together and then how to maintain them. And for me, it's about speed, but it's not at speed to compromise the housing conditions. There's one near where I live in outer Melbourne. It's going to be a ghetto. It's 21 stories high and it's been done because it's fast. It's at the intersection of 3 roads. It might be close to the train station, but the air quality is revolting and there's no trees. So I think it's really important that when we're going fast, that we look at the quality of the home so that it does last the next 50 years or more, and it's fit for purpose. I was also appalled to read recently, but then I realised what options you have. There is a Indigenous community group in WA who are actually importing structurally integrated panels from China. The aim is if they last 10 years, they will have achieved what they want to do. They will have given housing, shelter, but 10 years, that's a lot of money to spend for 10 years. We could do that locally with Buildings 4.0 CRC have done a lot on modern methods of construction. And I think I've got a project both on structurally integrated panels and also another one on printed homes. The interesting one on the printed homes is removing the barriers to them being part of the standards, the NCC and Standards Australia, because at the moment they're deemed to comply. And if something is deemed to comply, it takes an awful lot longer to get through the planning. So I think there's a lot of options, but it has to be forward-looking, not doing what we used to do. It's consulting locally, developing local skills, and then being on country to create those skills and jobs and wealth within the community to go forward.
Thanks, Jenny. Great question, because all the panellists are really keen to answer it. So I'll move across to David, then we'll come back to James and Alex.
Sorry, James. Well, just very briefly, such a pressing issue, Violet, not least in this country and elsewhere, and one that's going to increase. I know some people working in India, they have done for many years now, around where it can be 48 degrees. And I don't know the temperature of the NT, but I'm guessing it's not far off the same thing. So, and it's no warmer, and it's no cooler inside. Often the house is hotter inside because of thermal issues to do with housing. And there are, as you're knowing, quite simple design principles. This doesn't fix it, but it helps around the depths of buildings and having ventilation, lining up your windows so you get a cross breeze. It's astonishing the amount of houses that do not do that, actually, that are of a width that enables that, to have a breathing roof, where you have spaces in the roof, where you have reflective roofs, where I'm living in the Southern Highlands, the amount of housing is being built with black roofs. You just think, shut up, stop it. It's embarrassing, and then this is wealthy middle-class stuff, around there. It's absurd. It should be illegal. It should literally be illegal, right? Because the absorbance of that, or black materials, there are simple design principles which don't solve it, but it mitigates. That's what I'm saying, obviously, because electricity and the rest. The other thing, this NGO I happen to know called Seeds India, they've been around 30 years. They work in urban planning disasters. They've partnered with Microsoft in California, and they're using AI, cleverness, and wizardry in order to do heat maps of roofs in very low-income settlements, very modest settlements, but in order to have preparedness measures and mitigation measures. And this is for hundreds of millions of people across India and Bangladesh and Nepal relating to mapping heat. And there's a cleverness there. Again, a step towards doing stuff about a really complex issue.
Thanks, David. James?
I'll just reiterate what Jenny said. I worked for a couple of years in Alice Springs as an architect in remote Indigenous housing, and I remember there was a conference on in Alice Springs, and Fred Chaney, a West Australian, was speaking and talked about the need for like a spring of funding to come from the Commonwealth, and it'd be constant and certain. And then he described ACOs and locally based organisations like Willia Juntner as eyedroppers who could delicately place the funding in a really clever and site-appropriate, place-based way. I think there's a history in the Northern Territory of Besser block homes that are not fit for purpose, and I think to hurry slowly with a constant source of funding, like what the panellists were saying earlier this morning, is really critical, because it is a unique, difficult situation, often involving long distances, issues with prefabrication, and complex communities as well.
Alex, anything you'd like to add?
I'll just say that it is the problem that you're seeing in the Northern Territory that's very similar to the northern areas of WA and our remote communities, obviously, you know, similar climates and things like that. So we'll certainly be keeping an eye out for the same Commonwealth funding.
Any other questions? I'll go across. Thank you.
Hi, I'm just curious, in terms of procuring our own resources, critical resources in terms of food, power and water, has there been any serious consideration given to being more independent in these respects, in terms of storing our own water and power, and maybe even involving TAFE, or have some sort of training program for people to maintain and run the garden, and people to have more of an active role in maintaining these green spaces?
James?
Sure, Chris could talk to this as well, but we're always very encouraging. I mean, it's always that challenge around procurement at scale and efficiency and getting value for money versus site-specific responses where people feel ownership. And I know there's some cooperatives in the space here who, really work on the basis of people who living on particular sites can build a sense of ownership through, gardening and those sort of things. So I think we have a few programs on site-specific basis, but it's a horses for courses approach.
I think what we're seeing now in a number of different projects is battery storage and the like, in terms of how do we store the power so we can put that back through the grid or put it back through the property so that the tenants are paying the market rate. So there are some of those initiatives coming through now, but I think, as it was touched on earlier in Jenny's presentation, that it's just the funding and having when you're looking at a project which is in the tens of millions of dollars, and you start the value engineering process of trying to make that project stack because you're providing a subsidised housing product. Unfortunately, sometimes some of those are the things that you have to pull out of the project, but we're seeing a real shift and focus to keep those in the project now and making other changes. We had a question over there.
Hi, Mike Allen from Link Wentworth Community Housing. We're our largest community housing provider in New South Wales. We operate mostly in northern Sydney and western Sydney, and heat loads in western Sydney as well as flooding are very serious issues. But my question is, have we yet, or when will we, have enough experience across various housing sectors to develop some form of pattern book that goes to dwelling typologies and what environmental retrofits give the best outcomes in a balanced way for tenant amenity or resident amenity and owner investment? It sounds like there's a lot of things happening around the country, and particularly in metropolitan areas. Our apartments in Sydney are not that different to apartments in Perth, or likewise cottages in Melbourne versus cottages in Sydney. It seems like there's a pattern book solution that could give all of us guidance rather than each housing provider having to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, thanks. Good question, and then I'll pass across to Jenny to respond. But I would have thought that Andrew McNulty and Sean Carty would have had those matters all resolved.
I'm the chair, and I can tell you we've still got a bit of work.
Jenny.
It's not the same, but it has commonalities. So Race for 2030 is co-funding an apartments project, which is led by University of New South Wales, and it's both in the building and it's also in the it's looking at all the different typologies across the country for apartments, and it's looking at what are the commonalities, be they the ages, what they're made out of, and what are the climatic zones. And then another part of the team is modelling what would it take to upgrade those? What are the likely costs to make them perform better? What's the cost? It's not about electrification per se, but it's about that. So it's about the insulation or the external blinds. And we've in that project we've got, and anybody is welcome to join any of our industry reference groups as well on these. Much to Hazel's horror on that one, we've got about 40. On the private rentals one, we've got some more. On energy upgrades, we've got over 60. So what we use these, which are quarterly, is to actually get input for people who are in the community to make sure the research is right. So what this one is aiming to do at the end of its 3 years is to have that book that you're talking about, the toolkit. And so we're working with Owners Corporation Network with Fred Tuckwill and crew. We've got a number of neighbours so we can get data in. Once again, it's been a data issue. And Hazel's, I think, managed to get 6 different data sets, but then you've got 6 different ways the data's presented. So that's another way that will also help for community housing and for those with apartments going forward. Now, it's going to take a while, but if you'd like to know more about it, please talk to me afterwards.
Great. Thanks, James.
I think it hasn't been joined up as well as it could. Homes New South Wales is leading a lot of work, like they've got funding available at the moment. Monash University have done a lot of good work in precinct redevelopment, so looking beyond the site. Like we're often looking at a project because that's what fits within the funding parameters. I think there's an opportunity to look beyond the site in much bigger projects with the Accord and looking at council involvement and pluses and planting roots, permeability and that sort of thing. It's hard to deliver, but I think that's one thing that would be really positive. And the other thing is I don't think we're very sophisticated in our understanding of an approach to retrofit methodologies. Boards like certainty and governments like certainty, and if you say, we're pretty sure, I think there's a bit of asbestos, but it's still worth pursuing this rather than getting rid of it, and we could do these 3 things, we're making it up each time. And there is a knowledge base there, but I think, places like Germany, where we know they do retrofits with residents still sitting in their homes and they plaster on prefabricated insulated panels around windows and they don't even leave home. There's a lot to learn in that respect that would, address concerns around the shit factor of, what am I funding here? What are we getting into? Because I think that's where we need to be and looking at it proactively.
I mean, it's an interesting question that you put, because we had that same consideration with one of our projects we looked at a few years ago, and we went, we've got a piece of dirt, we've developed it, we've had the architects come in, and then I'll confer with other CHPs, and we're all doing the same thing. We're all meeting with an architect, we're building and designing a building to build a building to the architects to the brief, but they're designing it from scratch, where when you're in the States and they've got their low income tax credit, many of those organisations are building to a brief. So they've already got the cookie cutter project they're going to build to that. It's still going to be great, it's still going to meet all the amenities and provide the services, but they don't start from scratch. But yet we all seem to start from a new project, a new architect, we go and bid, they bid for the work, go through the design guidelines, we then select them, we then appoint them, then we start. And I think there's a way that all of us can become more efficient in the way that we say, well, this is what we want to have built, this is what we build to, and it can be replicable, and that way it gives certainty to builders, certainty to planners, certainty to all of the consultants who are involved. But right now we don't have that, we all start from scratch. So I think there is a consideration of how do we don't want to get to China where we're building all China towers, but how do we get to a space where we can build replicable towers or replicable projects that still deliver key amenity?
Yeah, I completely agree that there's already a lot of research and data out there, so we don't all want to be starting completely from scratch. But at the same time, certainly from a government point of view, we do also want to make sure that we have something that's appropriate to our housing and to what we're building. And certainly for anyone from WA or knows people from WA, you'll know that we think we're pretty special over here, and we don't always, even if something's been well researched elsewhere in the world or over east, we think, oh no, but we're WA, it might not be the same here. So that's something that I'm looking at doing over the next couple of years, and Jenny and I have been talking in the background about, okay, how do we look at my 45,000 properties, what's going to work for them, and we'll be making sure that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, not trying to start from scratch, but at the same time making sure that it is appropriate for what, for our building materials and things over here, for our climate zones. And then, hopefully we can all end up with that book, and we can all just be picking and choosing and getting the, best things from a cost-benefit point of view.
Great, thanks. We have a question just here.
Thank you. I'm Robin Sampson from, I might stand up, Baptist Care Land, I guess. Some changes happening there. I'm really interested in some thoughts from the panel on what I think is going to become more of a challenge, which is with our ageing population and the changes happening in the aged care legal regulatory space at the moment. We're going to be seeing more and more older people with more and more complex needs staying in their own home, because there's a big shift in the way that aged care is going to be delivered to focus more on enabling people to stay at home longer and longer, which is what people want and is a wonderful development. But I think there's some risks with that, because first of all, they might be in a home that's not, from our point of view, right-sized for want of a better way of describing it, but also potentially without the resources to maintain the home and to kind of improve energy efficiency and all those sorts of things. So any reflections on that sort of set of conundrums, I'd be interested.
We did a research project with Monash University called Space of Ageing, which looked at changes in demography and lots of European models where they seem to be much better at this than we are. So, I think most of us would have a base level livable design guideline, accessible silver or gold and the like, platinum in some instances. We have a disability portfolio too. But you would like to think that housing that's built can be appropriate as you age in place. I think you're quite right that baby boomers, emerging older people, will want their independence and be living in different settings, and I think there's real strength in them being integrated in the community. Some of the work we did with Monash was around co-locating services nearby and really thinking about a precinct approach to be able to support independent living and push off, like again, a preventative measure, the sort of final throws. So the houses need to be designed appropriately, and I think that makes sense. Part of what we did with Monash was look at a core model, so a disability bathroom with potentially prefabricated walls that could evolve over time. So if the base infrastructure is appropriate for someone with high levels of disability or mobility issues, other walls could be put in to suit that a family over time, and then it could be changed. So that happens in the UK, where commonly people are presented with a shell and then they make it their own home. And you could look at a scenario where a community housing provider over time might offer that service if it was prefabricated in the right way, that it didn't cause complete headaches, if that makes sense. I think that's one design approach that, you have the envelope, but it can shift over time.
I will just make a comment that doesn't at all relate to my current work, but just from some previous research work I did with Shelter WA and COTA, something of the ageing, I can't remember what the C was. I think that a really important help for ageing in place will be if we, at a policy level, say remove stamp duty, make it much easier, make the property market far more fluid. If people can be, buying and selling properties much more easily than we can now, that I think will hugely support ageing in place. Because, okay, it might not be the exact same place that people were in 10 years ago, but you can have people living in their own home for much longer if they can be downsizing a lot more easily, rather than at the moment there are so many, financial incentives for people to remain in that gigantic house that they've lived in for the last 30 years, rather than moving to somewhere that's more appropriate for them as they age. So not related to my current work, but I think that would be a good help.
Great, thanks. We'll go up the back there and then here.
Thanks very much. Peter Nelson from the Office of the Queensland Government Architect. This is another design question. Look, we need to deliver higher yielding outcomes, hopefully done well. The development industry is very adept at delivering housing that is largely mechanically heated and cooled, while social housing, in a Queensland context at least, has a rich history of passively heating and cooling homes that are climate resilient, reduce OPEX cost and bill shock. Can we find a sensible middle ground so we can leverage the broader development market? That's the challenge. Are we stuck in these diametrically opposed worlds?
That's a great question, and if we can answer and resolve that, then we have done a very, very good job. But I'll ask David to speak first.
Yes, I would love to. Well, you're the architect who's involved in this. I was at a thing a few weeks ago, and it was people in their. In fact, it was in Indonesia. It was a conference in Indonesia 2 weeks ago, and there are lots of people in their 20s and some people in their 40s and 50s. And this question came up, and the room was divided. And I'm not saying this is right. I'm just the reporter. By saying people in your 20s, no chance. This is AC Central, no chance we're going to go back to the passive cooling, which has been very effective and all those things, because of an expectation thing relating to people in age, which I have no clue if that's right or wrong, but it was a fascinating thought, a generational view.
And I've got an example from Queensland, from just outside of Brisbane. We've had a project that I inherited when I started at RACE 3 years ago in Castledine, and that was with I'm getting my acronyms right, but with Queensland Development and with EQL. The HIA were part of it, and there was somebody else as well. It's still ongoing. We're waiting for the final report. What they were 6.5 star homes. They're 2-storey. They were built just as standard by 2 standard builders, but all of them had solar on them. They were all electric. They had a demand response enabled heat pump. Did I put the battery in there? Yes, I think so. And what we trialled was how the bills reduced compared to other similar houses of the same design. We also trialled doing preheating, pre-cooling in the middle of the day, so to soak up the solar and to see would that reduce the demand on the air conditioning when they came home, as well as them putting the hot water system to act as a bit of a soak as well. So they're still connected to the grid. There's been some really interesting comments back from the community. There were over 20 homes as part of that, and they're looking now maybe to do another one, trial another one, testing others. So very happy to chat, because that allowed the bills to be down because it had solar. It allowed the air to be cooled mechanically because they didn't want to open the windows or whatever. And they were designed to the correct standard. But yeah, it's a really interesting conundrum. Yeah. But have a look on our website, because there's a couple of reports there.
I mean, subtropical Queensland is the perfect place for cross-ventilated. I think part of it is literacy, and there's a history of off-the-plan purchases, and I think that's a real problem. And so community housing providers or government-backed funding provides an opportunity for that not to be the case. It's the literate clients who can see the benefit, because when you're talking about hermetically sealed dwellings that have AC, you're talking about a small proportion of days through the year, potentially, if it's done correctly and well. I'm thinking in Western Australia, Stirling Towers, there are good examples of quite dense, Dornoch Terrace in Queensland, quite dense 1960s buildings with good bones, probably not the towers in the social housing towers in Victoria, but it's the same sort of principles. I think it's about making them desirable. We've done part projects with Nightingale and Assemble, and there is a desire for that type of product. It's a terrible word, but so I think in the space of the market, the less you sort of make it desirable, those other sort of awful examples, then it makes the other happen.
Great, thank you. We had a question at the front here. 3 rows from the front.
Hi, I'm Kim, representing Shelter Tasmania today, but have previously worked in a large-scale CHP. So firstly, I just wanted to say, Jenny, you touched on some really interesting points that I think we don't unpack enough in terms of generating demand for increased level of investment in housing generally, and you touched on it about all of those sort of social and economic benefits that are not immediate but longer term, and I think that perhaps is a piece that we could add into a data set around quantifying that, so that you're financial modelling when you're asking for funding for housing related, whether it be upgrades or new builds. So that's probably more of a statement. But anyway, my second point too was about, and it went back to your very first opening thing, Chris, where you talked about targets and setting targets. And whilst I absolutely agree with targets, I think the dilemma that we face, and I think, James, you might have alluded to it more latterly in your speech, is that can drive a response that's more around meeting targets regardless of the location, the quality, the longevity, etc. And I'm just wondering, a perfect example is the recent pause on the NCC implementation of those standards, and what that does around things like ageing in place. If we're now not going to be building to those sort of silver and gold level standards. So my question to the panel is, how do you perceive and see how we can make that shift around not proceeding with quality enhancements that are going to improve the longevity and the livability?
Thanks, Kim. James?
Sorry, I think one of the challenges that we face is we have a finite amount of funding available for housing, and we don't tell that story nearly well enough around the economic benefits in the long term, because the choices aren't limited from a government. I've heard Richard Dennis talk about this last week. There's submarine investment and there's gas subsidies that are provided. It's a higher level order. We shouldn't be taking funding from new supply to fund retrofits, but absolutely we should be doing everything well, because the legacy of not doing that is going to be a poor outcome for everyone and not in the public benefit. So I would hate to see, through a political imperative of having to deliver numbers, that you lose sight of the qualitative aspects of what we're doing. And we're pragmatists. I think all of the community housing sector and government know, you need a financial model that stacks up and it needs to fit within certain funding envelopes, but there are some non-negotiables, I think, when you're contemplating a feasibility, because otherwise, what are we doing here?
You've touched on an area dear to my heart. I would love to do a financial model that sits alongside the cost-benefit analysis, that is the livability and the health and the benefit to the economy. So when you go, okay, I'm going to build as government or whatever, I'm going to build this, you've got your cost benefit, yeah, it'll pay it back over X years, but on the other hand, the benefits we're going to accrue from this. So any researchers who want to help me on that, and anybody who wants to co-fund, I would love to do that, because there's a lot of support out there for it, and I think it can change the narrative. If we can prove through science and good modelling and good data, the actual benefits, like the Healthy Homes project in Victoria a few years ago, proved a lot of this, but it was only a short one, and it was only for over winter. But we need more data in so we can prove without doubt that these are the benefits that flow to the economy.
Great, thanks. A question at the front here, and then, sorry, start at the back there. Give us your hand up early before.
Thank you. My name's John Swain. I'm the manager of the homelessness unit at the City of Sydney. And I think these, I've just gone into, just for context, I think climate in these forums are becoming more and more pronounced. I've been going to these since 2019. You didn't hear about it. And every year it's just like worse. Like Lismore, I see rough sleepers now in the city from Lismore. We're seeing that displacement. I feel like climate, it's a housing crisis, and I think we've touched on it, but climate is potentially going to accelerate the need for housing. And I was curious from the panel around the recently released National Climate Risk Assessment, if you think it will have impact, if it is going to change potentially the speed that we build housing, but also the quality of the builds. Because I think that was quite a monumental document that was released by the government, but I'd be curious to see whether there is going to be impact or whether it's going to be another document that just gets forgotten about in a year or two.
Well, I was actually quite appalled that next day, because that was a monumental document. That's really good. Then we had the trajectory for low emission buildings. We've got the consumer energy roadmap update. There was about 8 of them. I haven't even read them all. I've got a poll down here, but anyway. And I think you're right at it, that there's a really big disconnect, I think, still at government, and particularly in the federal government. They're trying to do everything all at once, but they're not actually maybe talking between departments, because I couldn't believe what came out of the CR roadmap, which was customers will take this on regardless. No, they're people, they're not going to, the different circumstances, but in what circumstance will they take on being having consumer energy, and the homelessness, and the increase in climate. To me, there's a bit of a disconnect. So whether we need to be talking sort of more joined up or what, I don't know, but I totally hear you.
Probably there's an advocacy piece that is joined up, where you talk about younger people who are at risk of homelessness or can't get into the housing market, and they're the same people who are going to be unduly or more heavily exposed to the risks of climate change. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to take those documents and make them live and felt and heard by government, because you can. I mean, I remember hearing Peter Phipps a long time ago at one of these forums too, saying, "I don't understand why young people aren't really angry about housing," and now I think they are. And so if there isn't going to be an acceleration in climate stress as well, and I don't know what prompts it, Kangaroo Island fires, Black Saturday and the like maybe they could be joined up into a super meta issue that someone mentioned the other day that is sort of really powerful and triggers government to think more clearly around other choices in the macro economy that might solve both or mitigate both.
Thanks for that. We have one more question at the front here. I'm conscious of time, so this will be the last question before we adjourn for lunch.
Hi, my name's Rana Havard from Housing Choices Australia. I don't know whether this is a question, but it's a statement, maybe, which could be answered. One of the things that I keep hearing is data and how important it is we have. Now, I know, my role, I cover many states and the SHEPI funding, the SHERP funding and so on, and it's really up to the individual state government what and how they divvy that funding out. But the key thing that I've found is not having the business intelligence and not having the funding to be able to get the business intelligence to be able to do good business making decisions and so on. So I think that we've almost got to start from ground zero. Nationally, we need to have an index which has an overview of every property that falls under social affordable. So we've got the business intelligence there. So then when there's funding opportunities, it's not made, we think this is what we've got, we've actually got the informed information. Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely been an area that we've had difficulty with the rollout of the SHEPI funding in WA, because there just wasn't that granular data about the housing properties. So we've focused on ceiling insulation because it's something that's well known to make a good difference. But the data that we had around which properties had pre-existing insulation, it was very poor. So that meant we did need to make some changes to the program around bringing in, that we were doing remediation, pulling out old insulation if it was at certain levels. We didn't just have that data available that we knew, okay, we'll target these properties and we can have the best program that we could and use that funding as best we could, because we didn't have that background data. So at least now, from all the properties that we're installing insulation in, that is being well captured, and we have that information for the future of exactly what we've put in and when, and that's brilliant. But yeah, that's going to be a big piece for us around how do we find out what's actually out there at all of our properties. And Jenny said she's got some tips for me. Before we can really plan, okay, how can we spend all of our money in the best way? Because just missing that data, unfortunately.
I know you're talking about our business intelligence, but I think there's always challenges with data, in the integrity of data, and it takes time to get the data in, and then you question it, and then maybe you don't like what the data tells you. But I think data is essential, and the more detailed it can be, enough precision to make a decision is sort of an appropriate sort of guide. But if it can cover more than just the built form components, and it's more sophisticated than that, and maybe that's a project that the Commonwealth could take on to coordinate it in a consistent way, health data and the like. Like the Bureau of Meteorology is pretty good. Why can't our data on projects be similar to that? That would be a great thing to have confidence in the data.
Yes, and I've been talking to a number of community housing providers, and everybody has different data at different ages, coming from whether it's a government house, whether it's a new house, whether it's regardless, and the data sets don't even talk to each other. So we were, University of Technology Sydney and I were talking to, when Chia National was around, to actually do that big project. So what unlocks our funding is industry. Now that can be Commonwealth government, state government, anybody puts in cash. We match that 95%. And we're talking about actually developing that database with all the commonalities, because it's a big data issue. It's being able to get all the data in all of multiple forms, not and leaving the gaps where it's not there, so then can go back and fill it in to be able to say, okay, and this goes to the funding of it as well. Unless you know what you've got, you don't know what it's going to cost. So we're talking about, so maybe we can start those. So I'm at the housing conference in Canberra in a couple of weeks as well, and that was one of my aims for going there. So if there's a lot of people there, we're very happy to talk more about it and see how we can progress it, because I see that's the problem that everyone's facing, that you need to overcome to actually make a big difference and to get that low cost funding in.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to a wonderful audience for your great questions and participation today. On behalf of Ahuri and Business Events Perth, a quick shout out to say thank you to David, Jenny, James and Alex, panellists who have been wonderful and shared their collective wisdom and insights. I hope you found the session most useful. We're now adjourning for lunch for an hour, and then the concurrent session start at 2 o'clock. So I've been advised if you could look at the ones and pre-select what you'd like to do and enjoy your lunch, and thank you for your participation.